All right, so hopefully you enjoyed that video. It gave you some stuff to think about. I wanted to show that first so you could get an idea of what somebody's thought process was. And he's fairly young. He started in the Navy right after high school, as he described, and mentioned some things that we'll be talking about, like choosing his job, which he kind of fell into. There's another video that you can look at his channel and see about how he ended up in that specific MOS or military occupational specialty, which is your job in the military. I think that's super valuable to look at, but we'll look at some other perspectives too from other people moving forward. But let's keep going and let's talk about the different branches of the military, right? So here, this is going to jump me forward. So I'm going to, let's see if I can do this. Um, all right, there we go. Nope, that still jumped me forward. Sorry about that, y'all. Here we go. So here are our branches of the military. So the Department of Defense is over the four primary branches: the Army, the Navy, the Air Force, and the Marines. And the reason that's relevant is because they'll share a lot of the same processes, benefits, um, pay schedules, as we'll talk about. And so we can talk about them in terms of those things all together. But there are some other enlisted services, so different organizations you can join that you have to go through an enlistment process, which all of these also include some form of boot camp training after enlistment, right? Again, not focusing on these and others that are out there, but there'll be mention of those as we go along as they are relevant to the discussion, all right? So those are your primary options. Here's the structure of those branches that are under the Department of Defense. So at the top is our Department of Defense, or the DoD, right? And it's headed by the Secretary of Defense, which is someone that's appointed by the President of the United States. And then each department under that is headed by a secretary. So Department of the Army, Department of the Air Force, and the Department of the Navy. Notice there's only three. Each of those is also appointed by the president, and so there'll be a Secretary of the Navy, Secretary of the Air Force, Secretary of the Army. Now, the reason that the Marines don't have their own department is because by the structure, they're actually a department or a function under the Navy, as you'll see on the last level here. Each branch is headed by a military four-star general or admiral, and collectively they're known as the Joint Chiefs of Staff. So if you ever hear that when you're watching the news or anything that's discussing the military and they talk about the Joint Chiefs, that's who they're talking about. So these people that head each branch, right? So you have your Army Chief of Staff, Air Force Chief of Staff, the Chief of Naval Operations, and then here's where the Marines come into play in this hierarchy. There's a Commandant of the Marine Corps. So that's how the structure falls from the very top down to the level of each branch of the military. So what's the difference? Um, the second part of this, right after you finish all of this and get to the end and talk about resources and websites and everything, you'll stop. There'll be an assignment that's associated with it, and then we have a separate section on the ASVAB. The ASVAB is the test you take to determine your eligibility for entry, but more importantly, it generates different scores that help you determine which jobs are available to you. You can't just go in and list and say, I want to be a pilot. You have to score the score that's required in different areas to be able to qualify for that position. And then on top of that, the position has to be available within that branch at the time that you enlist so that you can actually appeal or a petition to get into that specific position. Remember, you're not the only one that's probably going for that, and some positions are going to be a little bit more competitive or a lot more competitive based on how popular or desired they are. But nonetheless, we'll talk about the specifics of that later. Our Miss Ojeda will actually. She put together a great lesson. Um, Different ASVAB scores are required to get into each branch of the military. So I have those listed here on the left side of your screen. you can look through. And again, notice the four main branches are there, but we also have the Coast Guard and the National Guard in there as well. And I'll talk about what those branches are in just a second here, just in case you don't know. But notice that if you're in high school and you have a high school diploma, you have to graduate with that diploma, the scores are lower than if you decide not to finish for whatever reason, which is not a great idea, and get your general equivalency diploma or GED. You actually have to get a much higher score to qualify to enter. What these scores mean, essentially, it's a percentage of passes. So let's look at the Air Force. It's the first one on our list. If you get a 31, that means you scored higher than 31% of people, which doesn't seem that high. But you also have to think that this includes everybody that's trying to join the military, right? And some of these individuals are very high scoring because they're going for officer candidacy. They might be going to a military academy. And so it's the average of all these scores, right? So don't think it's just a low average. You still have to perform fairly well. And in the ASVAB lesson, we'll talk about exactly what that score means. And y'all are used to taking tests like the ACT and SAT, and they actually relate to those scores, and a lot of the content is the same, right? So in general, we're aiming for about 15, 16, 17 on the ACT as an equivalent to be able to get these scores on the ASVAB. Now, again, relating to your job, and we'll talk about this later, you want to do much better than that. This is just the bare minimum to qualify, all right? And then I made a little note here. A bunch of different sources say that the Air Force, while the minimum is 31, they're really accepting most people at a score of 50 or higher. That's at the high school level, if you get your high school diploma. So the reality is, while that's their bare minimum and they might make exceptions to that, you want to aim for higher than that. So a couple of things to talk about in terms of what the differences are between the different branches. And there are a ton, right? And we kind of know the basics just based on public perception, right? Like Air Force, you're definitely going to be dealing with planes, right? And if you don't like flying, that might not be the best thing for you. In Navy, it's specifically for our water force, right? And so if you don't like being on a ship for long periods of time, or sailing or boats, or you get seasick, might not be the thing for you, right? So it's very clear what those branches are. In our armies, generally our combat force, they're going to be literally boots on the ground. And the Marines would be kind of a shared function between the Navy and Army, right? So they are under the auspices of the Navy, but and they're a water force, right? But they also are a combat force, right? So they share similar functions. But let's look at the bullets that I have here. So in general, in terms of experience, the Air Force and Navy are going to have better station locations, right? Like I know my cousins, a couple of them actually are in the Navy and are both stationed out of California, both out of San Diego, in fact, right? Beautiful city, wonderful weather all the time. And then I have a friend that is stationed out of Hawaii, right? So generally better locations. And that's because if you think about it, Navy has to be near water. Now, that said, you could end up somewhere like Mobile, Alabama. And a lot of the times, wherever you get stationed really isn't up to you. They'll ask you, as you'll see in the boot camp video later, where you want to be, but it doesn't mean they're actually going to take what you want and say into consideration. It's based on what the branch of the military that you're in needs at that time. And if they need people in Mobile, Alabama, which actually does have a port from the Gulf Coast and is near water, you could be there, right? But better station locations in general. And then using the word general and generally a lot because, again, this is brought together from all this information from different sources, but there's always exceptions. So second bullet, generally less deployment. What that means is when you get deployed, you're sent from your station or your home somewhere else. Y'all hear this about the military all the time, and you're deployed somewhere. Sometimes it's to a war zone. Sometimes it's just to another station somewhere. And the deployment can last months or years, right? You don't know necessarily. It's just based on what the need is at that time. And you don't have a lot of choice on when, where, or how that deployment happens. But Air Force and Navy are generally going to deploy less. You'll be more station based. Finally, better housing. You'll hear a couple of our YouTube contributors talk about how this is common, and their experience uh, definitely asserts that as well. So, better housing in the Air Force and Navy. Let's look at the Army and Marines. These are both PT intensive or physical training. So you're going to go through lots of PT and boot camp. They want to get you into shape. Again, this is being in the military is about defending our country in some way. And we want you in good shape. I wouldn't be good at that, even though I'm losing weight right now. I'm not going to be able to run after someone. I'm older, I have a bad knee, diabetes, all sorts of stuff. So that said, you're young, you're going to join the military, and you're going to have to get into good shape if you're not there already because it's physically intensive. And so in the Army and Marines, the training as well is intensive. So after boot camp, you're actually going to be required to keep that physical training up. And it's not just at your whim. In the Army specifically, I know, and the Marines, you're going to have to get up every morning and do physical training with everybody. So running, working out in some way to maintain that good physical health. The Army is known for having the fastest promotions. One of our videos will get into job opportunities there because they're the largest. They have the most available positions, right? And so, whereas you might enter at a very low level, right, as most people do, you have the opportunity with doing well at your job, developing skills, to move up fairly quickly. But again, it's based on how good you're doing and what positions are available. Um, to clarify, like I said before, the Marines are combat support to the Navy. So they are, again, one of our water-based forces, but they are focused on combat. So if you're in the Navy, you might be dealing more with running the ship, determining where we're going to station in the middle of the ocean or gulfs or wherever we are, and being ship-based. But the Marines are also going to be in the water more too, and more in that direct combat. Finally, because the Air Force and Navy have less deployment, the other two have more deployment, and it's likely that you'll go international. Again, referring to my family and just a lot of people that I know and verifying with experience and talking to recruiters over the years, I know people that have gone to places like Japan and Germany, and international, right? Europe and Asia. And then I've also known people that have never deployed internationally. Well, that's much less rare. I think everybody I've met has gone somewhere else outside of the country. Those that were in the Army and Marines travel more and likely outside of the country. And those two branches are also the combat force. So you're most likely going to be deployed to a war zone if we're in war times. And so just know those are the primary differences that I was able to extract for y'all. Some other military options that I want y'all to be aware of. We've talked about the Coast Guard. The Coast Guard is under the Department of Homeland Security. It protects waterways. It can support the Navy, especially if we're in combat times and we need more support, especially if there's the water element to it. If we are somehow in wartime or combat or doing some sort of maneuver where water is based for near a coast, whatever that is. It is a domestic force, essentially. We're trying to protect the areas around our immediate land in the United States. The Army National Guard, or just referred to as the National Guard sometimes, and the Air National Guard are community or state-based. They're going to report to your state governor, and they protect domestic interests. So the international travel is going to be there. They operate similarly to the Army, but they're not under the Department of Defense or Homeland Security. Again, they're based in your state. So you would join like the Texas Air National Guard, for example, and be in the equivalent of the Air Force, but at a state level. All right, and really looking out for the things going on within Texas in this case. You can join the reserve. So any of our branches also have what is the equivalent of like a part-time military experience, where you're going to do 1 week per month, essentially, of dedicated military service, or one weekend, and then a couple of weeks on rotation to do physical training and other things like that to keep you up to speed. The reserves are just what it says. They're reserve. They're a backup force, and you could get called to deployment for just the same amount of time as someone that's fully enlisted in the military, right? So being in the reserves isn't just a side job or a side gig. It's also a dedication and a commitment to being in whatever position you choose, right, full time when you're deployed, right? And again, that's not up to you. It just depends on what the need is. The Secret Service. I mentioned this because it is an enlistment service. It's not really covered by any of the other areas, but these are the people that usually wear black suits and sunglasses, and they have the earpiece, and they're protecting the president and the highest government officials, right? Highly selective. Have to go to four-year college. Generally looking for people with very unique skills. I have a friend that was going back and forth between the FBI and Secret Service on what he wanted to do, and he was a linguist. He was someone that specialized in language and the very intricate details of languages. And so he ended up going to the FBI, by the way. But Secret Service specifically for the president. I mentioned this because you'll see reference to it in some of the videos. And then finally, there's the Border Patrol. This is also under Homeland Security, like the Coast Guard is, but it's going to be the land-based equivalent of protecting our borders across the United States. All right, so there you go. Before we jump to work pay and benefits, and I'll actually jump back, there is another video I want you to watch, and I think it's a good time to think about, now that we have all these branches, how do you choose which one's the right one? And in this video, you'll see that the young man that talks about how he selected his choice, which ended up being the Air Force, he took different things that mattered to him and did some research and ranked them, and essentially got a score for each branch. And that's how he determined the Air Force was best for him. Very detailed. It's the way I think too. But what I encourage you to do as you listen and watch is think about what matters most to you. Why are you considering joining the military and what branch you want to be in? And write out those priorities. Maybe it's to get the education benefit. Maybe it's because you like the idea of having stability, right? And which one's going to give you a home base that you have a solid job at for years. Or maybe you're looking for the pay with the room and board benefits, which you can get anywhere, but maybe you want better room and board. Which branch does that? So watch this video, consider what matters most to you, make some notes to yourself, because again, at the end, we're going to ask you for some of your insights. All right, and I want to remind y'all, this is long. Like I said, you're going to watch a lot of videos. You're going to hear me talk a lot and look at some slides. Take some notes when you need to take a break. The reason I put it in this format in Nearpod is so you could stop and come back to the specific slide or point where you were at. So if you watch 30 minutes, an hour today, you want to stop and do another the next day, I won't be offended. I won't know that you did that, but you need to be in a good space to receive the information. So feel free to pause, take breaks as you need to. The other note I want to make is that a lot of our video, in fact, all of our videos feature young men. I did look, I tried to find a good resource that was provided by a female in the military, and they're out there, but just a little too biased or a little bit too opinionated and not factual based. And again, what I'm trying to present are facts. Feel free to search YouTube. There was a really good video by a young lady named Rochelle Mendoza. She's very opinionated, but she's honest. If you want to see someone, let's say you're Latina and you want to see someone that's also Latina, female, that's in the military, she has a lot of videos and very opinionated, and you might check that out. And so I didn't do that intentionally, other than to be intentional about providing you the most factual information. So with that, watch this video on what it's like to choose which military branch you want to be in. Thanks.